Welcome to the first episode of Just Branding. I'm super excited to introduce Matt Davies, who is a brand strategist, and myself. I'll get into that too. The idea of this podcast is to talk about design, brand strategy, and branding, obviously. So I guess I'll give this to Matt too, because a lot of you will be coming from social media and you're like, who's this Matt guy? And I'm like, this is Matt. He'll talk a lot and you'll come to know him. He can talk a lot. So I'll give it to you, Matt, and let's do this.
I'm hoping the talk a lot thing will be a good thing for a podcast, Jacob. But yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for that introduction. We are super excited. So I'm Matt. I'm from the UK. I'm a brand strategist consultant and have been on a roller coaster journey over the last, I'm going to not want to sound too old, but at last 18, 19 years. And so I'm really excited to share some of my experiences with the listeners and hopefully add some value, as I know that's your sort of aim as well, Jacob, to people really that want to get into brand strategy, that want to understand what it is, what it's like at the coalface of those of us practicing it, want to learn some new tips and tricks, and ultimately want to be inspired to make better brands, and be that as an entrepreneur or as a business owner, or as a designer helping other people to create great brands. So that's our ambition. And we're not quite sure exactly how it's all going to play out, but we're here for the ride and we're very excited to be with you. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the podcast is Just Branding, but there is this trend that's going towards brand strategy, or designers going towards brand strategy. And there's a lot of myths in the air about what it is. And thus I'm kind of in this journey of kind of pivoting between designer to strategist. I'm somewhere in between at the moment. I don't think I'll ever become full-blown strategist, and I want to have a discussion about it because you're in the position of being a full-blown strategist, and I think this is why this podcast is going to work so well, because I'm kind of doing that pivot, and a lot of other designers will be in that position. So at what point in time did you see this trend of like design going to strategy, and when did you make this decision to do that, and why?
So I think it's probably best to start off with a bit of background about me, and then I can sort of articulate where we are and where I am. So as you say, I'm now fully right over in the strategy arena, if you know what I mean. I hardly do any real design. I work with designers and graphic designers to kind of visualize the strategies, but I'm fully committed to the strategic side. My background, I started in graphic design though, and very much the principles of design, they never leave you. Once you're a designer, you're always a designer. Design for me came about when I was really young. So my dad, my dad's quite working class, and he's like, son, you need a career. You need to think about this quite early age. So he was very keen that that I had something useful to give the world. And I was really great at drawing. So and I still love drawing now, and painting and kind of sketching. And I remember Dad saying to me, like, son, you're never going to make any money like being an artist unless you're dead. Because I think he was thinking of like Vincent van Gogh, who who was really poor and then died and became famous. So he said, look, you got to
of the meme.
Yeah.
The meme where it's like, oh, what do you want to become? Graphic designer is like, oh, big hugs.
Well, this is it. So I went to the career advisor at my school in London in the UK, and they sort of threw up graphic design. And the thing I liked about design, and this has always stayed with me, and it stays with me now into the strategy work that I do, was that it was about purpose. It wasn't about my self-expression. It wasn't a selfish thing. It was about putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else, right? So be that your client, like what message do they want to get across, and how are we going to create the visuals to do that? And then as you kind of proceed in your career, you realize it's actually not even about the client, it's about the end customer. So how do they perceive what I'm putting out there? And that sort of idea of purpose through your work has been there all along. And then I worked for a few agencies in London. I then moved to Nottingham to get married, which is, if you're outside of the UK and you don't know the geography, it's kind of like right in the heart of England, where Robin Hood comes from. And so that's where I'm based at this moment in time. And again, I was freelancing for other companies, marketing companies, creative agencies. And in the end, and maybe I'll tell this story on another episode in more detail and bore everybody even more silly. But in the end, I decided to start my own business, my own creative agency. And whilst running that agency, which I ran for 9 years, I realized that one of the problems that we have as designers, and I don't know if you get this, Jacob, is the problem that misalignment with the client, right? So the client looks to you to create something. They give you a little brief, and in those days we were getting them like just on like emails email briefs, right? Great. You take that, you go to your team, you work with your design team, you create something, maybe 2 or 3 options, which you think hits that brief. And then you send it back to your client with all the great thinking, maybe even present it to them. And they're not keen on it. And then it comes back again with further amends. And you're like, okay, so then you try and do the amends and it goes back to the client. And some projects, and I'm sure we've all worked on them, sometimes this can become an absolute nightmare because you're like, hang on, you've just contradicted yourself in regards to what you told me 13 edits ago. And the truth is that people often find it very hard, if they're not creative, to visualize stuff. So they can see when it's wrong, but they can't see when it's right. And so anyway, what that led to was we realized that if we ran workshops, though, we got better alignment. So we got our team in the room, we got the client's team in the room, and we didn't have so much back and forth. And then that led to me realizing there's huge value in getting people to get to grips more with the overarching strategy. So we'd start asking questions like, well, how does this fit within your overall business strategy? Why do you even exist? Why should people care? Where are you going? What's your purpose? Who are you serving? And sometimes, with the clients we were working with, they weren't entirely sure, or they weren't able to articulate it, or the people we were talking to could, but then as soon as they tried to link into their wider, bigger team, maybe their board or their bosses, they were not aligned. And that led to, through our workshops, me being invited in more and more into boardrooms and right at the top to really, get leaders aligned around some of these core questions. And then that gave us a much firmer brief for my creative team to basically do some work with. And we found there was huge value in that. So that's kind of where I've come from. And then eventually I sold that business. I went to work corporate for a while. And then I recently, when I say recently, maybe a year and a half ago now, have branched out from there. And I'm just kind of launched on my own as a consultant. And so I work mainly with maverick CEOs who want to really kind of make a change, make a difference. But usually they're struggling with this alignment piece and they need someone with a beard and a bit of energy to kind of come in and help get their people thinking in the same way. And brand is the thing that does that. So that wasn't short. And we did warn listeners at the beginning that Matt Davies does talk a lot, but that's it in a nutshell. What about your journey, Jacob? Tell us where you are and how you've come across sort of strategy.
So just to give a better background, I've been doing branding for about, 15 years. I'd say the first few years were not branding at all, what I thought was branding. But I've been a designer at heart for a long time. And it's only a couple of years ago that I came across this idea of, this realm of brand strategy and what that meant for building brands. And it kind of just led me down this rabbit hole of giving more impact to brands rather than just the identity. And I started studying books and courses and following people, and it just led me to meeting people like you. And I think it was actually Chris from The Future that, maybe it was his videos that got me first onto it, or somewhere around there a couple of years ago. And it's just been, I've done many courses now, a bit too many. And I'm all about sharing this idea of brand strategy and how much it can actually affect brands and the world as well. So I think it's super important. And I think it's also a mindset shift for designers to actually consider themselves as a consultant versus just an order taker. And that is the biggest shift that I've seen. And that's why I've gone down this route. And I'm kind of like a hybrid myself. So I'm working on strategy with clients, And yeah, it's only the early days now. I think you've been doing it for much longer, and yeah, they're probably doing it for, I don't know, a year now. And that's what I want. I just wanted to share my journey as well. And yeah, that's why we're in this podcast. But
Absolutely. Sharing is caring, right? So that's it.
Exactly.
I think, is it worth...
I'm curious, like, I was going to ask about your definition of strategy, because that's what I'm experiencing at the moment. Everyone has this different idea of strategy, and all of a sudden there's all these people becoming brand strategists when they're actually not doing what the full scope of brand strategy is. So everyone has their own idea of it, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on it, so people listening can actually understand and have context for all of this.
Yeah, I think definitions is hugely important. Like, don't you think it's a little bit ironic that branding has a bit of an identity crisis? I think that's really ironic.
It is. It's super
It's like we're all doing branding, but we can't really easily articulate it, and that, I think, is the problem, and it's scary. So it's helpful to have some definitions down, and as you say, there isn't like a go-to kind of definition that is really, really clear, because I actually think the ideas of branding, we don't really have an English word, for it, really. I'd love to kind of draw on like some Japanese word or something that would say this is it, but I still, even in other cultures that I've worked in, I've not found a clear word. So the brand is the best we can do with it. What is a brand? Well, it's definitely not a logo and some fonts, although they might come into it. And that's, as you've probably had in your career, that's kind of, as designers, where we start off like, oh yeah, the brand is like the Nike swoosh or, the logo. And then you realize, actually, as time goes on, well, you could have the best created logo in the world and still have no brand, really, no resonance, no way of doing it. What we need, a better
vessel.
Yeah, we need a better definition. So the definition of brand that I use is the meaning people attach to you and your offer. And so, yeah, they can derive some meaning from your logo, but really it's deeper than that. It's much more about what you're doing for them, how you're behaving, why you exist, what products you're bringing out, how you're launching them, how you're speaking, loads of stuff. And all those mini touch points create meaning in their minds. And so, but what I found, I don't know if you've used a definition like that, but what I found is when you present that to business leaders, right, you're like, guys, you or girls, you don't actually own your brand, because it's the meaning people attach to you. They freak out. They're like, what? Of course we own our brand. It's like, no. All you can do is ping out the right signals, send out the right messages, so that the right people, create the right meaning in their mind and decide whether to buy or not, to join you on your quest or not. That's all you can do. So it's quite a difficult thing for people to get their heads around. Like, what do you mean? Like, of course it's my brand. And a part of it is you control a little bit of what it looks and feels like, but ultimately it exists in the hearts and minds of your audience. It's not, as my mentor and Marty Neumeier, I don't know if you've heard of him. In branding, he's a big deal.
Yes.
If you're getting into branding, some of his whiteboard books are absolutely phenomenal. But I've had the privilege of being mentored by him, and he defines it as the gut feeling that people have about you. The
reputation,
yeah. And he also says it's not what you say it is, it's what they say it is. And they're really kind of really great ways of thinking about it. So how does that definition sit with you, Jacob? Do you use something similar, or is that about right?
Yeah, well, I also follow Marty's stuff, and it's kind of the level C is where you're referring to the mentoring. Is that correct? Yeah,
that's
cool.
Absolutely right.
So, I agree with that. And I share a lot of his perspectives as well. So I'm totally on board with you. And I think it will be hard not to mention him in this podcast many times. We should put a tally up of how many times we mentioned Marty.
Yeah, he's like, for me, he was the one, when I was in my agency and I was looking around for probably similar journey to you, but I was probably maybe, and I'm really going to sound old now, maybe doing this maybe 8 to 10 years ago, trying to figure out like, well, how can I add more value to my clients as a designer? How can I get how can I align them, get the meaning I need from them so that I can create amazing work for them and help them make the change they need to make? Marty's books were the ones that I could have stumbled into I think I first stumbled into, I think it was called the Brand Gap, and it was a whiteboard well, it was actually a Slido thing. I can't even remember now. And I was like, mate, this is exactly what I believe. This is exactly what I need. And my story, Marty, kind of developed from there. When I went to work at a corporate, hey, you've got his latest book. Yeah. When I went to work,
I'm reading that at the moment.
It's brilliant. When I went to work at the corporate, we were rebranding, and I was one of the senior, on the senior team for helping the rebrand happen. And one of the things that we were going to do was launch the new brand into the company. There was like 2,000 people in this company, and so we were like after like a big cheese speaker, like who could we get along, who could help us. So I was privileged enough to get Marty, work with him a little bit on that launch event, and he helped present the ideas of branding to the wider business. I've just worked with him in a few other little capacities. And then one of the coolest things was that book you've got there, Scramble. I was privileged enough to be
just to give context.
Yeah,
I know there's listeners. Just to give context, I held up my Scramble book on screen because I'm on a video chat at the moment.
Good
get that
point.
People can't see.
I completely forgot about that. Yeah, of course, no one can see. Yeah, so Jacob was proudly holding up a book by Marty called Scramble, and that book he was drafting, and I was privileged enough to be in like a little group of his, and he sent it over, and I was able to proof it, and some of my ideas. Very minor ideas, I will add. But I'm
trying to get him to come down to Australia.
You would love him over there. And basically what he's recently done is with his business partner Andy Starr is set up a training course called Level C, and I was on the first one of that as well. And he's all over the world, so he's really cool, really interesting. Have a look at his stuff. But what I want to talk to you about now is, so if we've got this definition of brand. Being the meaning that people attach to you and your offer, what is a brand strategy, right? What is that all about? And really, that is the attempt to manage that meaning. That's how I would sort of look at it. That's what branding ultimately is. It's kind of having a bit of a high-level plan, high-level feel of the change you're looking to make in your audience's lives. A big, hairy goal almost for the world. At its zenith, and then trying to figure out all of the little bits and pieces underneath that to help you make that change happen. So a brand strategy is really the attempt to manage the meaning all the way through your business. And of course, your marketing and your comms and the way you look from a design perspective is a huge part of that, but it is only one part of it. There's loads of other bits and bobs, which I'm sure we're going to get into in the course of this series of podcasts, which that you also need to think about. And as a designer, you are in a great place to help business leaders really design the future, design their way forward, imagine that in a more meaningful way than perhaps other disciplines which are not used to thinking strategically and in a design way. So that's my definitions of that. Is that roughly yours as well? I hope it is, because otherwise we're on the wrong podcast.
For sure. Exactly. I think it's like management is a key part of it, and it's also a guide, like a roadmap to help the brand steer in the right direction. So once you've done the strategy, well, it's never really finished, but once you've crafted that, they have a guide to follow to ensure that it's actually aligned perfectly. Well, not perfectly, but aligned in all comms and marketing and so forth. So
it gives them a bit of that word guide is good as well, because it gives people a bit of a thoughts on the future. Like, what is we're very rear view thinking sometimes in business. What are our numbers today? What are our predicted numbers? You could do a little bit of future thinking, but it's all about numbers. Brand is not about numbers. It's about emotion, and it's about how, what are we trying to do in the world? Why do we even exist? Why should anybody care? And in the future, how does that look? What does that future look like? And how does our brand play a place in, a part in that future? And so I find when I sit down and do brand strategy with leadership teams, which I'm currently doing almost on a weekly basis now, I find it that some people use the word, it's like business therapy, right? Because a lot of these ideas, they're in their heads, a lot of leaders' heads, and they know kind of roughly where they want to go. But why strategists exist is to help tease those ideas out in a way that allows them to really easily articulate it and communicate it to their people, to their customers. And the biggest struggle I find that leaders have is, even though they might have an idea of that in their own individual minds, when they come together as a leadership team, as businesses get bigger, you get, more and more people sitting on the leadership team. How do you get all of those people? How do you get all of those ideas out of their heads and put it down on a piece of paper or on a slide, so that everyone can be like, yeah, that is what we all believe. That's where we want to go. That's the meaning that we want people to attach to us. And that's the challenge. And that's the role of a strategist. And you can take that as far as you want to go. I've gone the whole hog, and I do that.
Yeah, I think we could have a whole episode on that, like brand purpose and distilling a brand's essence down into one word and one key DNA, I guess. I'd love to have a deeper convo on that. So
let's do it. And on that note, while you've mentioned it, if anybody is listening to this and they're like, hey, this sounds really interesting, I've got some questions, please do send us some messages. You'll be able to find us on social media, no doubt, and we'll post some links at the bottom of wherever you've found this. I mean, there's various channels this is going to go out on. So, feel free to ask us any questions, any specific things you want us to do some deep dives on. We'd love to share our thoughts, and we'd love to hear your questions. So great. Cool.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Is it worth us just sort of thinking about the shift now into strategy? Because we've talked about our own journeys, but I think there's a wider trend going on in design. And I definitely felt it when I was running my business. And it was that I feel that design is almost treated by a lot of people as a commodity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
totally.
I think it might be something to do with the fact that there's a rise in technology, that most people can use computers now, that if you've got Word for Windows, you can change your fonts, and therefore you think you're a designer, right? You can put a little invitation to your child's birthday party together in half an hour. And
there's all the templates out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I totally get where you're coming from.
It's made it really tough, I think. And the other thing I think we do very poorly, and perhaps we'll have a session on this, is we tend to sell our time, right? That's how we've been set up as an industry. So what it means is, as technology is getting faster and allowing people to do things quicker, that means the value that we offer, say we're selling blocks of time and we can do that thing a lot quicker, that means our value is going down massively all the time. And so, we do get that kind of thrown at us. Like, what? That's going to take 3 hours? No, it's not. And it's like, well, hold on. You're just using Word for Windows here. We're trying to use a combination of InDesign, Illustrator, and also create a custom font for you. That's not quite the same as you typing something out in Word. But people don't get it. People don't understand it. And technology is, whether we like it or not, helping people do things quicker. So I think tech is a problem. The way we're set up to sell time is a problem. And the other thing that I think is a major issue is that we're in a global economy now. So, you can jump on Fiverr, you can find somebody in Bangladesh, they'll create you a logo for £5, or, $5 or whatever. Yeah. And that is killing us as designers, our profession. So we have to look.
That's why I think it's, it's important to specialize. And that's really what you're getting at here. Right? It's, you can't compete with that. Like you can't pay your bills, especially in a first world country with huge cities and huge bills. Like you can't do that. So I think that you're nudging on another topic for another episode on pricing and how to actually use specialization to increase your value, increase your fees, and not have to charge hourly. I don't think anyone should be charging hourly anymore. But we'll get into this topic. We've already nudged on purpose and branding and pricing. So I think we've got lots to talk about for sure.
We have, but
I think we should wrap it up, this first episode. I think we're getting close to the 30 minutes or so. But
actually, I was having so much fun.
Else to add?
Wowzers.
No, sorry, mate.
Well, I'll just finish.
Let's keep going.
I just finished that little bit off just really quickly. The only reason I mention that is you're right. These are massive subjects. But the only reason I mention that is that I think all of those reasons and this idea of commoditizing design, it behoves us as designers to therefore consider ways that we can add value. And that's where it came from for me. Like, how do I make myself more valuable? How can I do better work? How can I do more meaningful work? And if you also are feeling this as a designer, I definitely think these podcast series are for you to help you get to grips with really creating more value in your work. So that's it, really. So yeah, you're right. Let's wrap up. I hope that was an interesting introduction for everybody. We're excited to be doing these, and yeah, show us some love on social media. Show us, follow, subscribe to our various channels, and we look forward to catching up with you in episode 2.
Thanks, mate. That was great.
Is that right?
And yeah, likewise. Thanks again for listening. We really appreciate it. And I'll see you in episode 2.